Welcome back, Salted Souls. It's really good to be back behind the microphone with you. I know it's been a long break, and I know that things are going to look a little different moving forward, but I am genuinely so glad to be here again, sharing space, sharing stories, and having these conversations with all of you. This podcast has always been about honesty and reclaiming our inner authority, and that intention hasn't changed, even if the shape of things has. So, without further ado, let's jump into today's topic. We're going to be talking about seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, something that has been very present in my life over the last few months, both personally and professionally, and something I know many of you quietly struggle with too. So, when Liza decided to step away from the podcast, it wasn't a shock in the sense that it came out of nowhere. It was a conversation that had been unfolding behind the scenes for a few weeks. But still, even when you intellectually understand something is coming, it can shake you emotionally when it actually arrives. We had jumped into this project headfirst, full of excitement and vision, and suddenly, just a few short months later, I was standing at a crossroads, either continue this on my own or shut it down altogether. I was overwhelmed, that's the cleanest way to say it. I felt like I had lost my compass, like something that had been orienting me suddenly disappeared. And all of this was happening right as the seasons were changing, which has always been a major trigger for my seasonal affective disorder. The following months felt like I was moving through life on autopilot. We went on a beautiful trip to New Orleans at the end of October. It was my first time there, as well as Liz's and my partner's. It was very meaningful, grounding, and special. And from the outside, everything probably looked fine. And even on the inside, I would say everything felt fine at that time. And the holidays came shortly after, which were very low key, spent quietly with family, nothing dramatic. Nothing was obviously wrong, but internally, something was slowly dimming. I began to feel like I had lost my zest for life, if you will. Getting up and going to the gym required more and more effort each day, even though I was finally actually seeing the results of months of consistency. Eating healthier felt less like nourishment and more like obligation. By the end of the day, I had very little energy left to show up the way I wanted to for my partner. Even small joys started slipping away. I lost interest in meditations and even video games, both of those being things that normally helped me decompress, and they were starting to feel pointless. And that's when fear crept in. So I had been on mirtazapine at this point for over a year, and it had genuinely changed my life for the better. Finding a medication that works for my brain has never been an easy task. So when I started to feel like it wasn't working anymore, I panicked. I was terrified that I was sliding back into my pre medication state, which is a place I had worked very hard to climb out of and had no desire to revisit. As the depression deepened, my anxiety surged alongside of it. It's a very familiar pattern for me. My anxiety doesn't usually show up as panic attacks anymore. It did when I was younger. But now instead, it manifests as deep exhaustion and irritability, and that especially comes out toward the people I love the most. I tend to withdraw, I go quiet, my fuse gets shorter. Outwardly, though, everything still looked relatively normal. Most people at work didn't notice a difference. Most of my friends didn't either. My partner, of course, knew something was wrong, but to the outside world, I was functioning. When my partner and I went to couples therapy, our therapist suggested a few practical steps, which included increasing my vitamin B intake, using my SAD lamp again, and getting my hormones checked. Unfortunately, the earliest appointment for my hormone testing wasn't until March, but I did start implementing the other suggestions. And if I'm being completely honest, they didn't feel like they were making that much of a difference. So by December 29th, I had an appointment scheduled with my psychiatrist. I was holding on to that date like a lifeline. The days leading up to it were some of the hardest I've experienced in a long time. Felt like I was living in a constant state of PMDD, which, for anyone who doesn't know, that's premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I cried at nothing. I was exhausted. I was irritable. I was overwhelmed by existential dread. It felt relentless. Still, I made it to the appointment. When I sat down in her office, she asked how I was doing. And at first, we talked normally, like we always do. I told her I was feeling worse by the day. And then something inside me broke. I started crying, which is something I have never done in her office before. It was deeply vulnerable for me, but she was very kind, supportive, and grounding. She did end up suggesting that we add a supplemental medication right now, which is Prozac. So I'm now on mirtazapine at 45 milligrams and Prozac at 10 milligrams. I will be the first to admit that I don't love being on multiple medications, but I also knew I couldn't keep going the way that I was. I started it that night and quickly realized it was not a nighttime medication for me, which she did say when she prescribed it to me that it was somewhat activating. So I did switch to taking it during the day instead. I've been on it for just over a week now, and because I'm extremely sensitive to medications, I usually know pretty quickly whether something is a hard no or a tentative yes. This one so far feels like it might be a yes. I'm trying not to get my hopes up too much. Experience has taught me some caution in that regard, but I do feel a little less sad. I'm still tired, but I do notice that something has shifted. So I'll continue monitoring it, and I do have a follow up appointment in about a month to reassess, but fingers crossed. I'm sharing all of this, though, not for sympathy, but because I want to bring awareness to how SAD can actually affect people, especially those of us who are doing our best, taking our medications, going to therapy, and still struggling. Because if you're anything like me, when your mental health worsens, the guilt creeps in. We tell ourselves stories. I didn't read the right book. I didn't spend enough time outside. I didn't take the right supplements. I didn't meditate enough. But sometimes, oftentimes, that just isn't the case. So let's talk about what seasonal affective disorder actually is. SAD is a subtype of depression related to changes in seasons. For most people, symptoms begin in the fall and continue through the winter months, affecting energy, mood, motivation, and sleep, and often they resolve during the spring and summer months. Less commonly, some people actually experience symptoms in the spring and early summer instead. So, what does that mean in plain language? It means this condition is seasonal and reoccurring. It's not your fault, and while there are absolutely steps we can take to modify how it affects us, there's no guaranteed checklist that will prevent it entirely. So, this brings us to the deeper question: what's actually happening in the brain when we get sad? So, seasonal affective disorder isn't caused by one broken neurotransmitter. It's the result of how certain brains respond to reduced light exposure. So, in darker months, serotonin activity tends to drop while the brain clears it away more quickly. At the same time, melatonin, the hormone that signals darkness and sleep, can linger longer into the morning, making it feel like night never fully ends. So, this can contribute to deep fatigue, brain fog, and emotional heaviness. Your circadian rhythms become misaligned, and systems that regulate mood, energy, and alertness tend to fall out of sync. So, dopamine signaling can also decrease, affecting motivation and pleasure. For people with depression or trauma histories whose nervous systems are already more sensitive to stress and change, these seasonal shifts can hit even harder. SAD also does not look the same in everyone. So, hormones play a significant role in how it presents. Women are diagnosed with SAD more often and tend to experience deeper fatigue, increased sleep, appetite changes, carbohydrate cravings, and more emotional symptoms such as sadness, guilt, and rumination. Fluctuations in estrogen and progesterone across the menstrual cycle, PMDD, perimenopause, or postpartum periods can amplify the same neurochemical systems already affected by reduced light exposure. Men are diagnosed less often, but are not necessarily less impacted. So, seasonal shifts can subtly lower testosterone and disrupt dopamine signaling, which affects motivation and energy. Symptoms may present as irritability, withdrawal, emotional flatness, or disengagement rather than sadness. And social conditioning often masks these experiences as burnout or stress. Seasonal affective disorder can also present differently in LGBTQIA plus people, not because of identity itself, but because of added layers like minority stress, trauma exposure, and barriers to affirming care. So, transgender and gender diverse people may experience interactions between seasonal mood changes, sleep, circadian rhythms, hormone regulation, and body dysphoria. Research does not show that gender affirming hormone therapy causes SAD. In fact, it is associated with improved mental health outcomes overall. However, hormones do affect sleep and circadian biology, which can shape how SAD is experienced. So, how do we support ourselves when winter hits and our brain starts acting like it's running on a low battery? For me, the most helpful way to think about SAD treatment is as layers. So there's not a single magic fix. There's not a perfect checklist that guarantees you'll never struggle again. More like, what are the evidence-based supports that help the brain and body recalibrate, and which combination actually fits your life? So first and foremost, I'm going to start with light therapy, because for a lot of people, this is a cornerstone. Bright light therapy is one of the most well studied first line treatments for winter pattern SAD. The most common clinical recommendation is a light box that provides 10,000 lux of broad spectrum white light with UV filtered out. It's recommended you use it for about 20 to 30 minutes in the early morning, ideally soon after waking. Now, it is known to cause headaches and sometimes nausea for people because it's so bright. If you're noticing that, start off at a lower time and slowly work your way up. I had to start at 5 minutes and then slowly work up to 10 after about a week and then to 20 after another week. And I think now I'm up to 30. I honestly don't pay attention to the time. I just turn it on, do my stuff in the morning, and then turn it off. The reason that specific number matters is because 10,000 lux is strong enough to meaningfully signal the brain's circadian system through the eyes, basically telling your internal clock, hey, it's daytime now, which can help shift sleep timing, reduce that heavy melatonin hangover, and support mood regulation. Lower intensity boxes can work, but they usually require longer sessions and the timing still matters. Most guidance emphasizes morning use because light exposure earlier in the day tends to be the most effective at shifting our circadian rhythms in the direction we want for winter depression. Practical things that matter are consistency, so you do have to use this on the daily. Positioning, you don't want to be staring directly into the light, you want it more in your peripheral vision. And then again, safety. If you have eye conditions, if you take medications that increase light sensitivity, or you have bipolar disorder, it is worth talking with a clinician first before you use bright light therapy, because it can rarely trigger agitation or hypomanic symptoms in vulnerable people. Some people notice improvement within days, for others, it takes a couple weeks. Either way, if you don't notice instantaneous results, you are not failing. Please be consistent and give it a good week or two before giving up on it if it's not working for you. The next layer is medication, and I want to normalize this as much as possible. Seasonal medication adjustments are common in SAD. That can look like increasing a dosage, adding an SSRI seasonally like me, or changing timing based on side effects and sleep. This isn't a personal failure or a sign that you regressed. It's treatment adapting to biology that changes with the seasons. For many people, winter requires extra support for the same reason asthma sometimes requires extra support during allergy season. You're not weak for having a season. Next, we have therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy tailored for SAD. It's sometimes called CBT SAD, has research showing it can be as effective as light therapy during an acute winter episode. And it's especially useful because it focuses on the things winter tends to mess with. So, withdrawal, avoidance, rumination, and that slow creep of hopelessness. CBT SAD often includes behavioral activation. So, like getting back into life in small, doable ways. cognitive work, so catching the winter lies your brain starts telling you, and then relapse prevention planning. So that's knowing your early warning signs and what you'll do before you're in a full spiral. Beyond CBT, general therapy can also help in very real ways. Interpersonal therapy can support relationships and isolation, and trauma informed therapy can help if winter tends to activate nervous system patterns like shutdown, irritability, dissociation, or hypervigilance. Sometimes the most effective winter therapy isn't about fixing you, it's more about helping you stay connected to yourself and the people you love when your brain just wants to disappear. This is also where meditation fits best, in my opinion, as a supportive layer that can make the other layers easier to access. So, meditation and mindfulness practices have evidence for improving sleep and reducing stress reactivity and rumination, which are all relevant to SAD. But the research we do have that looks specifically at mindfulness based therapy for preventing SAD reoccurrence is mixed. And at least one pilot study found that mindfulness based cognitive therapy given in the spring didn't clearly prevent the next winter episode on its own. There's also research suggesting that mindfulness tends to drop in winter for people with SAD, which honestly makes perfect sense. If your brain is foggy, if it's fatigued and out of sync, sitting still with your thoughts can feel harder, not easier. So, if meditation becomes difficult in the winter, that isn't proof you're doing it wrong, it's just information. If meditation helps you, beautiful. If it doesn't, you're not broken. A trauma informed approach matters here as well. So, for some people, especially trauma survivors, certain kinds of meditation can actually increase your distress or dissociation, which is why grounding based practices, eyes open meditation, shorter sessions, or movement based mindfulness can be safer for those of us with trauma. Movement is another layer that sounds simple, but it's not always easy in practice when your motivation circuits are offline. The research on exercise and depression consistently shows that physical activity can reduce depressive symptoms and anxiety and improve sleep. For SAD specifically, there's less direct research, but the mechanism would make sense. Movement supports dopamine signaling, regulates stress hormones, improves sleep quality, and gives your nervous system a we're alive and in motion cue that can counteract shutdown. The key is choosing movement that matches your capacity. In winter, gentle and consistent often beats intense and heroic. Walking counts. Strength training counts. Stretching counts. A 10-minute loop around the block counts. If you can, outdoor movement during daylight hours is a two for one. You get light exposure plus movement. And if all you can manage is a little bit, it still matters. Now, lastly, I want to talk about vitamin D because it comes up consistently in SAD conversations. Vitamin D is tied to sunlight exposure, and levels can drop in winter, especially in higher latitudes, in people who spend less time outside, and in people with darker skin. Here's the science based truth: vitamin D supplementation is essential for people who are deficient, and correcting deficiency supports overall health. But vitamin D as a treatment for SAD symptoms specifically has very mixed evidence. There are randomized trials that did not find that vitamin D supplementation reliably improved seasonal depressive symptoms compared to placebo. So it's not accurate to say vitamin D treats SAD in a guaranteed way. However, if you are deficient, replacing vitamin D can still be a meaningful part of supporting your baseline resilience. If you are supplementing, dosage should be individualized, ideally based on a blood test for 25 hydroxy vitamin D. General dietary recommendations for adults are often in the 6 to 800 IU per day range, depending on age, and many clinicians use supplements around 1,000 to 2,000 IU per day when levels are low or sun exposure is limited. The big warning here is that vitamin D is fat soluble, meaning it can and will build up in the body over time. High doses taken for long periods can cause toxicity, leading to dangerously high calcium levels, kidney problems, and other serious issues. That's why megadosing without medical guidance is not the move. If you're considering higher doses or you're taking vitamin D long term, it's worth talking with a clinician, especially if you're also taking calcium or if you have kidney issues. It's important to note that all of these suggestions aren't cures, they're tools. Please speak with your doctors. The goal isn't to power through winter or shame ourselves when symptoms show up. The goal is to support our brains and bodies with compassion, flexibility, and evidence based care. And to remember that needing support is not the same thing as doing something wrong. I hope today's episode resonated with you. If it did, you're welcome to share it with someone who might need this conversation. If it stirred questions, reflections, or even disagreement, you're welcome to join the conversation or suggest future topics on Instagram or YouTube at Salt and Sovereignty, or just search Salt and Sovereignty. Until next time, honor the truth that keeps you sovereign.